Distraction is one of the most dangerous enemies of your destiny because it doesn't destroy you in an instant. It drains you slowly, quietly, invisibly. It doesn't come wearing a warning label. It comes disguised as something harmless, something normal, something everyone else is doing. It comes in the form of endless scrolling, constant noise, multitasking, and a restless mind that cannot sit still long enough to hear the still, small voice of God. In a world that rewards busyness and noise, silence feels uncomfortable, almost unnatural. But that silence is where God speaks. His voice doesn't compete with chaos. It waits for your attention. And too many people are missing divine direction, not because God isn't speaking, but because they are too distracted to notice. We wake up and reach for our phones before we reach for purpose. We check messages before we check our spirit. We listen to podcasts, music, news, and everyone else's opinion, but not the whisper of heaven. Distraction is not just an interruption of time. It is an infection of focus. Every time we get lost in the noise, our spiritual senses dull a little more. We start mistaking activity for progress, noise for purpose, and connection for intimacy. But the truth is, being surrounded by noise doesn't mean you are connected. Sometimes you can be connected to the entire world and completely disconnected from God. Distraction is subtle. It doesn't always look sinful. It can look productive, successful, even admirable. But anything that keeps you from the voice of God, no matter how good it looks, becomes a thief of destiny. The enemy doesn't have to destroy your life if he can just keep you too busy to hear divine instruction. He doesn't need to stop your blessings. He only needs to drown out the one who gives them. And that's exactly what distraction does. It fills your mind with noise so your spirit forgets what peace sounds like. But listen carefully. Silence is not empty. It's full of answers. When you learn to quiet your surroundings, your mind, and your emotions, you create a sacred space where God can speak clearly. The voice of God is not found in the whirlwind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire. It's found in the whisper. And a whisper can only be heard by those who are still enough to listen. That's why the greatest spiritual discipline in a noisy world is stillness. You cannot hear heaven when your mind is racing and your heart is cluttered. Peace is not something you find by accident. It's something you make room for intentionally. Distraction will always compete for your attention, but you must choose focus over frenzy. Guard your time like your life depends on it, because it does. The difference between an average life and a God-led life is the ability to listen when others are scrolling, to pray when others are posting, to be still when others are running. The world may call it laziness, but heaven calls it intimacy. God doesn't speak to the frantic mind. He speaks to the focused heart. Start by creating moments in your day where you unplug from everything and plug into His presence. Turn off the notifications that pull your attention away from peace. Replace the endless noise with worship, gratitude, and reflection. Even 5 minutes of silence before God can realign your entire day. Don't let the temporary noise of this world make you miss the eternal sound of His guidance. Every major transformation begins in silence. Moses met God in the quiet of the desert. Elijah heard Him in a gentle whisper. Jesus withdrew to lonely places to pray. The power of heaven often arrives in moments the world calls ordinary. If you keep filling your life with noise, you'll never experience the extraordinary that happens when you listen. So, make a decision today to stop letting distractions steal your destiny. Protect your focus. Silence the unnecessary. Create sacred pauses in your life where only you and God exist. When you do, you will begin to notice that His voice was never gone. It was just waiting behind the noise. The clarity, peace, and direction you've been searching for are already within your reach. You just need to listen, because the moment you master silence, you unlock the sound of heaven. Unforgiveness is a silent prison that keeps countless hearts locked away from peace, purpose, and the presence of God. It masquerades as protection, convincing you that holding on to pain will somehow shield you from being hurt again. But in truth, unforgiveness doesn't protect you. It poisons you. It turns your soul into a battlefield where bitterness grows like weeds, choking out the voice of love, joy, and divine direction. You cannot clearly hear God when your heart is filled with resentment. His voice is love, and love cannot flow through a heart clogged with anger. Every grudge you hold becomes another layer of noise between you and heaven's whisper. Unforgiveness is one of the most deceptive killers because it feels justified. The world tells you that you have the right to hate those who wronged you, that revenge will make you feel whole again. But holding on to bitterness never hurts the other person. It only chains you tighter to the moment that broke you. Every time you replay that hurt in your mind, you relive the pain and give it fresh power over your present. God cannot heal what you refuse to release. Forgiveness doesn't mean the wrong was right. It means you've decided not to let the wrong rule your life anymore. It means choosing freedom over frustration, peace over pride, and purpose over pain. When you forgive, you are not excusing the offense. You are excusing yourself from being its prisoner. Some of you have carried pain for years, pain so deep it's become part of your identity. But God never designed you to live with the weight of resentment on your shoulders. He's calling you to lay it down, not for them, but for you. Because when your hands are full of grudges, they're too heavy to lift in worship. When your heart is heavy with anger, it cannot feel the warmth of grace. Forgiveness doesn't erase your memory. It transforms your memory. It replaces bitterness with wisdom, anger with compassion, and wounds with strength. There is divine power in letting go. When you release what hurt you, heaven releases what's meant for you. The moment you choose forgiveness, something supernatural happens. The weight you've carried begins to crumble, and the whisper of God starts to rise. Suddenly, clarity replaces confusion, peace replaces turmoil, and love replaces the bitterness that once blocked your blessings. Forgiveness is not weakness, it is the loudest declaration of strength. Anyone can hold a grudge, but only the strong can set it free. Understand this. Forgiveness is not a one-time emotion, it's a daily decision. There will be days when the memory resurfaces and your heart wants to close again. That's when you remind yourself, I'm not letting this poison my spirit anymore. Every time you choose grace, you heal a little more. Every time you choose mercy, your spiritual ears open a little wider. God's voice flows freely through hearts that are light, not heavy. The lighter your heart, the louder His direction becomes. Unforgiveness blocks your destiny because it keeps you tied to your history. You can't move forward when you're still fighting battles behind you. The devil doesn't need to destroy you if he can just distract you with pain from the past. But you have a choice today to keep feeding your pain or start freeing your purpose. Let go, not because they said sorry, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. You deserve to breathe again. You deserve to hear God again. Forgiveness doesn't change the past, but it transforms your future. It's not about forgetting what happened. It's about deciding what happens next. You can live in the prison of your pain or step into the promise of your peace. The moment you forgive, the bars that once held you captive begin to fall. You'll find that the person who truly needed mercy wasn't them. It was you. When you release bitterness, you make room for blessings. When you forgive, you invite God's presence back into places that were once too dark for light to enter. The same hands that once clenched in anger will rise in praise. The same heart that once carried hurt will overflow with healing. And the same voice that once trembled with pain will begin to sing with purpose. So, forgive not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Forgive until you feel free. Forgive until the hurt no longer controls you. Forgive until God's peace fills every place pain once lived. Because when you finally let go, you won't just hear God, you'll feel Him walking beside you, whispering, "You're free now. Keep moving forward." The illusion of self-sufficiency is one of the most deceptive barriers between you and the voice of God. It disguises itself as confidence, independence, and strength, but underneath it all lies pride. The silent belief that you no longer need divine direction because you have everything figured out. It whispers, "You can handle this on your own. You don't need help. You don't need God." And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to rely more on your own wisdom than His word, more on your plans than His purpose. You begin to walk by sight instead of by faith, and that's when the connection starts to fade. God's voice doesn't compete with pride, it withdraws from it, because when you fill yourself with self, there's no space left for Him. Self-sufficiency feels powerful at first. It feeds your ego, fuels your ambition, and gives you the illusion of control. But what the world calls control, God calls captivity. Because when you start believing that you are your own source, you cut yourself off from the very source that sustains you. You start carrying burdens you were never built to carry. You start worrying about outcomes that were never meant to be in your hands. You become your own God, but a God too small to save yourself. The illusion of self-sufficiency doesn't empower you. It exhausts you. It replaces prayer with planning, surrender with striving, peace with pressure. The truth is, you were never meant to do life alone. From the very beginning, humanity was designed to depend on divine strength. Every breath you take is borrowed grace. Every heartbeat is a reminder that your life is not your own. When you think you can handle everything by yourself, you silence the voice that has the power to guide you through everything. God doesn't speak to the proud heart that says, "I don't need you." He speaks to the humble heart that admits, "I can't do this without you." Humility is not weakness, it's alignment. It positions your spirit to hear what pride would have kept silent. There's freedom in surrender. The moment you stop pretending to have it all together and admit your need for Him, the walls begin to fall. When you finally say, "God, I'm tired of trying to fix everything on my own," heaven responds. Because the strength of God begins where your strength ends. When you let go of control, you give God permission to do what only He can do. He's not asking you to prove your power. He's asking you to trust His. The illusion of self-sufficiency makes you think you're standing tall, but true power comes from falling to your knees. Some people think surrender means defeat, but in the kingdom of God, surrender is victory. It's the key that unlocks divine favor, wisdom, and clarity. You don't lose when you surrender. You win in ways you could never imagine. Because when you stop leaning on your own understanding, you open your life to supernatural direction. God begins to reveal solutions you could never have planned, open doors you didn't even know existed, and turn obstacles into opportunities. The very moment you say, "God, I can't, but you can," heaven begins to move on your behalf. The illusion of self-sufficiency is the reason many can't hear God. Pride fills the airwaves with static. It tells you that asking for help is weakness, but the strongest people are those who know when to reach up. It tells you that faith is for the desperate, but faith is for the wise, the ones who know their own limits. When you realize that your plans, no matter how perfect they seem, are nothing compared to His purpose, you'll stop striving and start surrendering. You'll stop trying to control outcomes and start trusting the one who already holds the outcome in His hands. You see, God doesn't need your perfection. He desires your dependence. He's not impressed by how strong you are. He's moved by how surrendered you are. The closer you get to Him, the more you realize that strength without God is just stress disguised as success. You can build an empire on self-sufficiency, But only God can build a legacy that lasts beyond you. When you depend on yourself, everything depends on you. But when you depend on God, everything depends on Him, and He never fails. So stop fighting battles that were never meant to be fought alone. Stop trying to carry the weight of a world you didn't create. Lay it down. Admit that you need Him, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. The greatest leaders, the strongest warriors, the most fulfilled souls are those who walk in constant dependence on divine power. They know that without God they are nothing, but with Him they can do all things. The illusion of self-sufficiency may promise control, but it delivers emptiness. True fulfillment begins the moment you stop saying, "I've got this," and start declaring, "God, you've got me." Because when you surrender your strength, He gives you His. When you let go of pride, He fills you with purpose. And when you finally stop trying to be your own God, you'll finally hear the real one speak. His voice is waiting behind your surrender, ready to guide you, bless you, and remind you that you were never meant to do this alone. Fear is one of the most crippling forces in the human heart because it doesn't always come shouting. It comes whispering. It tells you to play it safe, to hold back, to stay comfortable, to never take the step that could change everything. Fear paints a picture of failure so vivid that you forget the promises of God that surround you. It convinces you that the worst will happen before you even try, and before you know it, your faith grows silent. Fear doesn't just stop your movement, it blocks your hearing. It fills your mind with so much noise, so many what-ifs and worries, that the still, calm voice of God becomes drowned in anxiety. The truth is, God is always speaking, but fear is the static that keeps you from hearing His peace. Fear disguises itself as wisdom. It tells you, "Be careful," when God is saying, "Be courageous." It calls itself logic, but it's really limitation. You tell yourself you're being smart, but what you're really doing is staying small. Fear convinces you that comfort is safety, but comfort is just another cage. It may feel familiar, but it's slowly suffocating your purpose. Every great destiny requires a leap, and fear will always show up right before that leap. That's how you know you're close, because fear doesn't fight what's not a threat. It fights what's about to break through. The louder fear gets, the closer you are to something powerful. But here's the truth. Fear and faith cannot occupy the same space. One will silence the other. When fear speaks, faith fades. But when faith rises, fear flees. You were not created to be controlled by fear. You were created to conquer it. God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. That means courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to move forward in spite of it. Faith doesn't wait for fear to disappear. Faith walks while fear trembles in the background. When you take that first step of obedience, even with trembling hands and a racing heart, heaven moves with you. Fear thrives in imagination. It builds mountains that don't exist and storms that never come. It exaggerates the danger and minimizes your divine protection. But faith sees differently. Faith looks at the same situation and says, "I don't know how, but I know who." It reminds you that you're not walking alone. The same God who parted seas, calmed storms, and raised the dead is still with you. Every time you trust Him over your feelings, fear loses its power. The problem is not that fear speaks, it's that you've been listening to it more than you've been listening to God. Fear can also take root in your past. It reminds you of the times you failed, the times you were hurt, the moments that broke your heart. It says, "Remember what happened last time." But God says, "Remember who brought you through last time." Fear lives in your memory, but faith lives in your vision. If you keep looking back, you'll keep repeating cycles. But if you lift your eyes and look forward, you'll start seeing what fear was trying to hide, the miracle waiting on the other side of your obedience. The voice of God doesn't echo in panic. It speaks through peace. If your mind is filled with fear, it's a sign you've tuned into the wrong frequency. God never speaks through confusion. He speaks through clarity. His words don't stir anxiety. They bring assurance. When you choose to calm your spirit and lean into faith, His guidance becomes unmistakable. You'll begin to realize that most of what you feared was never real. It was just a shadow. And light always exposes shadows. When God's truth enters your heart, fear loses its grip because it cannot survive in the presence of truth. To conquer fear, you must feed your faith. Speak life instead of doubt. Declare His promises instead of replaying your worries. Every time fear says you can't, respond, God can. Every time fear says, what if it fails? Remind yourself, what if it works? You defeat fear by replacing its lies with truth. Fear says you're alone. God says He'll never leave you. Fear says you're weak. God says His strength is made perfect in your weakness. Fear says it's impossible. God says nothing is impossible with Him. The more you rehearse His word, the quieter fear becomes.